Everywhere was water. The girl could not breathe. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw only the white ceiling. In her memories, a man appeared who was squeezing her hand tightly. He blamed the girl for the family's misfortunes. The man called her Kaylee. The girl's eyes widened. Her name was Emily Jenkins. Her parents abandoned the girl immediately after birth. She saw what she was not supposed to see. Grandma Annie took her in. Emily lived an unhappy life. Once again, Kaylee's memories caught up with her. She shook her head, trying to drive them away. Is it possible that she found herself in Kaylee's body? Emily did not feel the presence of the body's owner at all. Kaylee's memories ended in the water. This meant that the girl had jumped into the water. This meant that Emily had entered the body of a dead person. Experiences about what had happened engulfed the girl. Suddenly, a middle-aged man grabbed the girl by the throat. According to the recollections, it was Duke Smith, Kaylee's father, who was saying something about the girl's engagement. There was another man in the room. A smile was frozen on his face. Kaylee's father raised his hand over the girl and struck her. Emily fell to the floor. Another man asked the Duke to leave the room. He obediently followed the order and headed for the exit. Emily remembers that the man in the room is Kaylee's fiancé, as well as the ruler of the country. Only one thing sends a shiver down the girl's spine. Around the guy there were many vengeful spirits. Emily was still sitting on the floor, afraid to move. The man looked at the girl in amazement, as she could not hide her trembling. He struck the sheathed sword on the floor next to Emily's head. The guy didn't intend to kill the girl, although she had done something wrong. Emily could not calm down and informed her fiancé about it. A muffled chuckle came from the guy's mouth. He asked a question about the decision to marry. Emily nervously clenched her fingers because Kaylee's memories were fragmented and she didn't know how to respond. The man sat down opposite the girl and looked into her eyes. He assured her that he would support her if there was true love for another guy in the girl's life. Then, carefully taking the girl by the chin, the guy lifted her head so that she looked him in the eyes. He asks her to put on the crown, even if the girl wants to die. Emily saw ghosts. Her grandmother Annie, who was a fortune teller, took her under her care. Annie always told the girl to avoid water. Emily did so because she wanted to live a happy and long life, even though she simply worked in the mountains. As a result, Emily found herself in Kaylee's body, who had herself jumped into the water and was also preparing to become the king's companion. Emily saw the spirits watching her and the man. They were also awaiting her response. The guy wiped tears from the girl's face. Then Emily decided to ask about the consequences of her refusal. The king reports that the wedding was postponed due to the bride's cold, but in this case the reason for the failed wedding will be the girl's death. A shiver ran through the girl's body from head to toe. She was outraged and at the same time frightened by such a response. Smirking, the guy asked if the girl was going to jump into the water again. Emily's answer is definite. Now she will definitely live her happy life and will never renounce it. The man rose from his knees. The girl noticed that her future husband did not believe her. He ordered to summon Duke Smith. Kaylee's father appeared in the room almost immediately. Inside, he was indignant that someone could order him around like that in his own home. The king informed the Duke that his daughter would become queen. The girl watched the king sitting on the floor. He warned his father not to dare touch the girl again. There were many dark ghosts around the king. Emily was surprised by such a malicious aura, and most of all by how the king coped with it. She was sure that the king could actually kill the Duke. The king, feeling this strange feeling, tried to overcome it. Kaylee's father promised not to touch the girl again. However, his face reflected all the displeasure emanating from within. Emily, meanwhile, was pondering how the king had managed to suppress the spirit's command, for an ordinary person would not have been able to do so by his own power. The man extended his hand to the girl who was still kneeling. Then he pulled Emily towards him and told her that the wedding would take place in 4 days. As the farewell, the king embraced the girl. As he passes by the Duke, he reminds him that the knights will be watching to ensure he does not lay a hand on the girl. Roderick Perouse Blake ruled the kingdom. The king carried a great deal of karma and resentment. And so, 4 days later, the wedding day arrived. Emily sees Kaylee's memories of people talking about the upcoming wedding and calling her father a terrible person. The king tried to get married twice. He did not want to create relatives on the female side, so he was looking for a family, not striving for power. 2 previous brides died without ever wearing the crown. The same thing happened to Kaylee because the girl drowned, but only Emily knew about it. There was a knock at the door and the groom entered. He was dressed in a white formal suit. Rodrigo seemed to radiate light. The girl was surprised that now there was a pure aura around the guy, although just a few days ago the space was teeming with evil spirits. The groom looked at Emily questioningly. The girl, trying to maintain a calm appearance, justified her state with nervousness. Rodrigo did not believe this and voiced his thought out loud. Emily boiled with indignation. She was irritated that he decided what she could feel. The girl refrained from expressing her thoughts and decided to be honest with him. She explained that she didn't know him well and was afraid of saying something inappropriate. It seemed that the man was satisfied with her answer, and he nodded approvingly. The courtier informed the groom and bride that it was time for them to make their entrance. They headed towards the guests awaiting them. The girl's eyes widened. Something seemed strange to her. It was a light breeze that came from an unclear source. Raising her eyes upwards, she noticed the aura. It was a spirit, unlike a ghost or an evil spirit. It seemed to be on a level above them. Emily stood rooted to the spot all this time. Coming to her senses in time, she decided not to let on that she saw anything unusual. This world seemed terrifying to her. The girl decided to act cautiously and headed with her fiancé towards the doors of the hall. King Rodrigo Peter Blake sat in his office. He leisurely sipped whiskey, discussing his future bride. He was conversing with the commander of the first squad, Jade. Jade suggested that the deaths of the previous two brides were connected to Kaylee's father, Duke Smith. The king froze with a glass in his hand. Such a thought had not occurred to him. He averted his gaze, considering this option. So it was Smith. This could well have been the Duke, since the previous two brides had died, and Smith wanted to become related to the royal family. However, Smith's daughter attempted suicide, so the girl had no intention of becoming a queen. The king decided that it was necessary to keep an eye on the Smith family and figure out how to use Kaylee for his own purposes. Rodrigo continued drinking and seemed in no hurry to go to his bride. He instructed Jade to assign someone to keep watch over the queen's chamber. Then Rodrigo drained his glass in one gulp. The king headed to the girl's room. Commander Jade looked after him with concern. The king suffered from nervous breakdowns and insomnia, and rumors circulated among the people that he was insane. Squeezing the pollen, Jade mentally prayed for the king's peace. Rodrigo was walking along the royal corridor when suddenly he got a headache. It seemed that it would split into 1,000 tiny particles. Emily sat in the huge bedroom on the couch by the bed. She was pondering what was supposed to happen next. The girl was frightened by the king's sudden appearance, and then she noticed a huge number of spirits around him that were not there in the morning. Emily sat down next to Rodrigo on the bed, feeling awkward about what was happening. The guy leaned over the floor and held his head. She heard the voices of spirits calling for killing. The girl tried to look into the guy's face over his shoulder and called him to come to his senses. Rodrigo's face was wrinkled with pain, and his hair was tangled on his forehead. Now the guy could hear the girl. In helplessness, he fell to Emily's knees. The girl froze with her arms raised, but the guy was already asleep. She examined the guy's face and admired his beauty. His energy seemed sacred to her, like that of the spirit she had encountered at their wedding. Emily could not understand why evil spirits clung to him. The girl remembered her grandmother's instructions. Annie asked her not to interfere with the life of spirits, or else they would influence her life. Emily put the guy on the bed and sat down next to him. This man saved her from Duke Smith, so she must help him. The girl had previously watched her grandmother handle spirits, so she was able to contact them, and as a token of gratitude, Rodrigo wanted to do it just once. Emily contacted the spirits and they noticed that the girl could see them. The girl bit the pad of her finger until it bled, and then she placed both hands on the amulet and asked the spirits to go to their world. The space gradually began to clear, and there she sat in a completely clean room, not believing that she had succeeded. It was only temporary, as if the spirits had simply left the room and could return at any moment. This was definitely enough for the king to sleep peacefully today. Now Emily thanked Rodrigo. She lay down next to the guy on top of the blanket and fell asleep. The next morning, the girl woke up to the chirping of birds outside the window. Opening her eyes, she first saw Rodrigo and recoiled from the guy. He watched the girl sleep, her head propped on her hand. Emily wrapped herself in a blanket and explained that nothing had happened between them during the night because the guy had immediately gone to sleep. Not responding to her words, Rodrigo got up from the bed and left. Standing behind the door of the room, the guy pondered the girl's words. It seemed strange to him that his mind was so clear. He associated this with the appearance of the girl next to him. It has been 4 days since the ceremony. It was one of the clear sunny days. Emily was taking a bath. She had not seen the king since that morning and seemed to be starting to miss him. The girl wanted to make a normal amulet, and for this she prepared the things she could get in the office. After that night, evil spirits began to disturb her as well. Having made a few amulets, Emily began to lay them out around the room. She heard a strange sound here. Most likely it was a lingering spirit, but no evil energy was visible. Emily pushed the curtain aside. A small blue creature was looking at her, tears streaming from its eyes. The creature said that its home was here. It seemed to be very frightened. Emily promised that she would not offend him, and for the first time during her stay, the girl introduced herself by her real name. The kid explained that he has no name and people usually don't see him. The girl noticed a cracked casket nearby which looked over 100 years old. It was the spirit of the casket. Due to the breakdown, the spirit could not return home. With a feeling of regret, Emily explained that she could not repair this thing. Tears streamed from the creature's eyes, and it looked pitifully at the girl. Unexpectedly beaming from the idea that came to him, the little one asked to leave one of the amulets in his casket so that evil spirits would not come to him. Emily listened to him and did so. The spirit funnily jumped with joy and shouted. The girl was amused by this and she laughed out loud. For the first time since her stay in the castle, Emily smiled. 4 more days passed. The castle grounds were illuminated by bright rays of sunlight. Emily fell ill, but she needed to do something else to stabilize the place, so the girl got up from the bed. On her wrist was already a bracelet of wooden beads. Emily needed to continue working on the column she was planning to install in the room. Grabbing the back of the bed, Emily headed towards the beam. Immersed in her work, the girl did not notice Rodrigo looming over her head, thus scaring her. The guy learned that the girl fell ill, so he came to check on her. Delia, the maid, came with him, carrying a tray with medicines. Emily noticed that the spirits could not enter the room due to her barrier. She could not stop the most terrifying ones, so she needed to finish the job. Noticing the tree in the girl's hand, the king took it away. He also confiscated the knife. The king left, waving the knife, and asked Emily to take the medicine. In reality, the reason for the wife's arrival in the room was the captain's words. Smells of burning and a girl cutting something with a knife were coming from the queen's room, so Rodrigo was afraid that something might happen. Squinting, the king examined the object seized from the queen and could not understand why she needed to carve this. After her husband left, Emily lay on the bed with her face buried in the pillow. A tear rolled down the girl's cheek. The pillar was almost finished, and now she had nothing to do. However, the girl remembered Kaylee Smith's diary, which she had brought from the duchy. The girl began to read. Emily took Kaylee's diary, hoping to fill in the missing memories. However, the girl found out while reading that Kaylee didn't care about anything and described all sorts of unnecessary things, like a birthday cake. There was a knock at the door. The girl quickly hid her diary under the blanket. This was Delia, who brought the parcel from the duchy. It contained medicines and a letter from Kaylee's father. Emily refused the medication as she felt much better and was unsure of the Kaylee's intentions. The girl took an envelope from the tray. She was outraged after reading the flattering words from a man who beat his girlfriend at home. Emily's eyes lingered on one of the lines. Duke Smith was asking for one thing. The girl asked Delia about the meeting with the king. The maid promised to send people to dress the queen. Emily lifted the blanket and looked at Kaylee's diary. She wondered about the girl who should have been in her place. When the soul departs, feelings also leave the body. Only people with a deep grudge or great ideals become vengeful spirits or guardian spirits. Having pulled out her diary, the girl would very much like to get an answer from Kaylee if she could find out. At that time in the king's reception room, officials vied with each other to accuse the king and shout out their opinions. Rodrigo listened to this and the spirits attacked him again. The guy held his head in his hands, trying to lessen the pain. Unable to restrain himself any longer, the king leapt up from his seat. Jade watched him apprehensively and was ready to run and stop him. The commander saw a colossal difference between the person Rodrigo used to be and what he is now. Just at the moment when the king drew his sword from its sheath, the queen and the maid appeared in the doorway. The arrivals realized they had come at an inopportune moment and hurried away. Emily noticed out of the corner of her eye that Rodrigo was only getting worse, and the number of evil spirits around him had increased. The girl could not simply walk away. She turned around and rushed towards the king. Hanging on his arm, Emily didn't know what to do next. The girl was trembling with fear. The king raised his head. It seemed his eyes cleared. The beads on Emily's wrist drove the spirits away and they retreated a little. Rodrigo seemed to have only just noticed the girl and looked into her eyes. The king turned to the officials waiting for him in the room. They were all sitting with their heads bowed. Rodrigo returned the sword to its sheath and looked at Emily questioningly. She came to tell him about a letter from home, but this news would sadden him and the spirits would surround the king again. Therefore, the girl invited her husband for a cup of tea, not knowing how else to get out of the situation. The man was puzzled. He did not expect the queen to come with such a request. Rodrigo agreed to meet with Emily and asked the maid to bring tea. The king dismissed the people waiting in the hall. Delia was arranging cups and saucers, while the newlyweds sat opposite each other on the couches at the table. Besides them, Jade and another of the king's courtiers were present in the room. Emily drank tea that she absolutely disliked, while the king sat with his arms folded across his chest. An awkward silence reigned in the room. Rodrigo inquired about the reason for the tea party. He noticed that the girl did not like the tea. Wiping her face with a napkin, the girl tried to justify herself. The guy laughed, recalling that she had said that before. Emily did not consider Rodrigo a bad person. The reason was only in the spirits that once again flooded the space around the guy. It happened because the girl was sitting far from the king, so she decided to stand up and approach him. Rodrigo turned towards her. Emily felt the demons retreating from the guy and sat down next to him, trying her best to hide her awkwardness. Then she took the guy by the hand. Rodrigo only smiled and watched the girl's actions. Feeling the guy's palm, Emily noticed that due to prolonged torments by spirits, the king's energy had become tangled and blocked. Due to his powerful energy, a person in such a state became more dangerous. Emily remembered how she worked with her grandmother and was responsible for keeping a person's energy in order. She decided to apply the same method to Rodrigo. Reaching for the guy's back, the girl began to massage his back, pressing on certain points. A few minutes later, the king felt warmth spreading throughout his body. His body relaxed, and he fell to Emily's knees. The king's energy flow improved slightly, and he was now quietly snoring on his wife's lap. Jade inquired anxiously about Rodrigo's condition. Emily reassured the commander that the massage had such an effect on the king. Then Jade tried to explain the situation the girl had encountered in the waiting room, attributing it to the king's insomnia and nervousness in recent days. The girl made it clear that she did not blame Rodrigo for anything and understood his condition. The king stirred in his sleep. All those present stared at the couch with interest and seemed to think of strange things. In reality, the king instinctively moved in search of pure energy because of the amulets that the girl had. Emily covered herself with a blanket and fell asleep next to Rodrigo. After some time, the king woke up and could not remember how he had fallen asleep. Rodrigo raised his head from the girl's knees and tried to find out from Jade how it happened. The commander, however, did not know how to tactfully mention the massage, so he simply remained silent. Sitting on the couch, Rodrigo put his palm to his forehead. He ordered the girl to be carried to his room, since it was closer than the other rooms. The king approached the window, through which the bright sun was shining. His condition improved, which the boy certainly noticed. And it happened again, thanks to the queen. After a while, Emily opened her eyes slightly and almost screamed in horror. She decided that she had ended up in hell and began to feel her hair and hands. This was the king's room, teeming with evil spirits. There were a huge number of them and they flew everywhere. Emily sat up abruptly in bed and called for Delia. The maid explained that it was the king's idea to place her in this room. The girl merely laughed at such a way of thanking her. So Emily forgot about the letter from the duchy and headed to her room. Emily continued reading Kaylee's diary. She learned that the girl loved another guy. The queen wanted to know as much as possible about the girl whose body she had moved into. She held the duke's letter in her hand and did not know how Kaylee would have acted in this situation. The king invited Emily to dine together. She decided to tell him about the letter at this meeting. Emily did not want to die, like Emily, but it was destined for the deceased by fate. In the garden of the kingdom, there was a huge variety of different flowers, and the sounds of fountains could be heard everywhere. Rodrigo had already arrived at the dining place and was waiting for the girl. He had called her not just to have dinner. A few days ago, Jade brought the king a copy of the letter that Duke Smith had sent to the queen. Rodrigo familiarized himself with the letter, thoughtfully covering his mouth with his hand. Kaylee's father wanted to attract people from the duchy to the palace. The king would not have given his consent to this, but he decided to see how his wife would behave. Would she side with the duchy or the king? In the garden, Rodrigo pondered how to start a conversation with the girl. The evil spirits surrounded him again. Jade, standing behind the king's back, noticed that he was feeling unwell again. However, as soon as the queen appeared in the garden, the air became clean again. The king stood up, greeting the girl. Rodrigo noticed changes in his state again with the appearance of his wife nearby. It seemed to him that another world was concentrated around her. The guy's face broke into a smile. The food was already on the table, and the spouses took their seats. Emily started the conversation first. She told the king about the letter from the duchy. Then the king inquired how the girl intended to deal with her father's request. Emily took his words seriously and questioned the fairness of her right to choose. The guy was amused by her honesty. He noticed that he hadn't laughed so sincerely in a very long time. Emily decided to voice her opinion about the Duke's request. She nervously crumpled the sheet in her hands. Then she put the envelope on the table, and then she announced that she intended to refuse the Duke. Emily explained her decision by saying that it would be wrong towards other people. Rodrigo looked pensively at the queen. She clearly explained the reason without involving him. The king pondered how thoroughly the girl had thought everything through. He began to respect her more for her well-considered decision. Emily tore the guy away from his thoughts. The girl's mouth was watering from the smell of food, and she asked for permission to start eating. Having received a positive response from the king, she broke into a smile, and Rodrigo noticed how truly interesting this girl was. He watched the girl gobble up the food. He was drawn to her. Remembering his plans, Rodrigo announced that he was going hunting for a few days. Emily opened her mouth because now his condition became clear to her. Due to the fact that the guy killed while hunting, his karma only accumulated. Rodrigo was a king who had a nickname due to his madness. He was nicknamed the Raging Beast. The guy tried to alleviate his uncontrolled impulses through hunting, but this only drove him deeper into madness. Emily watched the men preparing to depart. She understood that the hunt would only exacerbate the situation for the king. The girl really wanted to tell Rodrigo not to go hunting, but she was afraid that she would not be understood and considered ridiculous. The king turned his horse and approached Emily. She wished him a good journey, and the king suggested doing the same thing that was happening behind them. Turning around, the girl saw a guy and a girl merged in a farewell kiss. Emily blushed with shame and awkwardness. Her eyes widened and her mouth opened in horror as she envisioned her kiss with Rodrigo. The girl's reaction to the proposal only amused the king, and he laughed loudly. The guy was just joking with her. Then Rodrigo leaned towards Emily's ear and advised the girl to stay away from the water. The admonition caught the queen off guard. Apparently, the king was afraid that she might jump into the water, as Kaylee had done. The lad turned his horse around and gave the order to set off on the road. Emily watched the departing people and hoped that everything would be all right. The king was heading at a fast gallop straight into the forest, trying to catch up with the fleeing boar. His accompanying people were shouting at him, warning of the danger of the dark forest. Rodrigo was once again surrounded by evil spirits and was no longer able to cope with them. He thought only about how he wished his wife were here. The spirits kept screaming for him to kill. They took over his mind. The king caught up with the poor creature and killed it cruelly. Only blood splashes flew across the glade. An enormous bear suddenly emerged straight from the forest. Jade ordered to shoot the animal. Rodrigo froze in place and only watched as the animal approached him. By this time, it had already grown dark in the castle, and the moon was shining brightly high in the sky. Emily tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. She thought about Rodrigo and worried about him. Angered by her restlessness, the girl pushed the blanket off herself. She decided to go for a walk. Emily was strolling around the castle grounds. Ahead, she noticed a lake. The girl remembered the king's instructions to stay away from the water. Emily sat down on the steps of the staircase and rested her head on her hands. Suddenly the wind blew, like on her wedding day, and she felt a strong energy. The girl became alert. Emily understood what it meant and shrank back. It was the same spirit as at the ceremony. He dismounted his horse and sat down next to the girl on the step. She did not want to get involved with yet another spirit under any circumstances. The guy asked if the girl could see him. Not receiving a response from her, the spirit said that it knew that the girl was not the real Kaylee Smith. Emily almost reacted to his words, but managed to restrain herself in time. The spirit spoke of the king's wound. He saw that the girl was not going to answer him, so he informed her of Rodrigo's impending death. Hearing this, Emily could no longer sit indifferently. She jumped up and tried to find out more in a panic. The spirit laughed because now he knew for sure that the girl could hear him. The guy advised Emily to hurry up. The queen ran towards the castle. Rodrigo was already being driven to the castle. The guy mentally called for help. Emily ran towards the castle. Already on the way, she felt the smell of blood. Rodrigo returned from the hunt. The servants dragged him to the king's bedroom. The girl ran with all her might. She wanted to explain that it would only get worse for him in the bedroom, but she didn't know how to do it. For the whole king's chamber was swarming with evil spirits. Emily burst into her bedroom, the door slamming shut and waking the little creature sleeping in its box. The girl ran around the room gathering all the amulets that were there. She apologized to the little spirit for taking his amulet too and ran to the king. Emily clutched the amulets to her chest. She hoped it would help because in a near-death state, a person in a room full of malicious spirits might not have enough protection. Several servants were already standing in front of the king's bedroom. They were afraid to approach closely as Rodrigo was beside himself. Emily was also in no hurry to let them in because it was unsafe in the room. A doctor hurrying to the wounded appeared here. Seizing the right moment, the girl slipped into the king's bedroom along with the physician. Emily was confronted with a disheartening sight. The king lay wounded in his side on the bed, while spirits filled the entire space. The wound was not very serious and did not threaten life. The queen decided that the spirit in the garden had deceived her and became very angry with him. Emily berated herself for falling for the spirit's words again. Rodrigo said something barely audible. The girl leaned closer to him, straining to hear. Suddenly, the king raised his sword in the air. Emily and the doctor recoiled. The queen realized that Rodrigo's soul was mortally wounded, and he received new blows every day. After all, the spirit's words were true. Emily grasped the king's sword-wielding arm. Evil spirits were very strong and did not retreat. Therefore, the girl decided to go into battle. She fought them with all her might, although she had previously promised herself not to get involved in matters with evil energy. However, the king had no one else and only she could help him. Emily was determined to make Rodrigo's life easier. The king was in the abyss. There was only emptiness around. He was beginning to think that he would never be able to get out when he saw the light that was approaching him. And then I heard someone's voice. This was the voice of his wife, who sat beside him and held his hand, in which was a sword. Now the man saw the girl. She was holding his hand. Emily felt tired, as she had expended too much energy fighting the spirits. The girl let go of the guy's hand, getting ready to go and rest. But suddenly the king grabbed Emily's hand and asked her to stay with him. The queen released his hand and began to shout. The girl was scolding her husband for such a dangerous occupation. The boy smiled wearily and asked the reason why he should stop hunting. Every word was still difficult for him. Emily's scream turned into tears that streamed down her cheeks. The king asked everyone to leave except his wife. As soon as the door closed behind the servants, Emily sat by the bed, burning with shame at her behavior. Rodrigo watched the girl. He told her about the darkness and how he saw the light, and then felt the queen's hand in his. The guy also told his wife that he knows about the ongoing horror, but is unable to resist it in any way. Emily felt compassion for him, so the spouses were side by side and simply conversed. 2 days later, the queen fell ill again. Duke Smith shouted for someone from the duchy to come and take care of the poor girl. He pretended to be concerned about the condition of his daughter, but in reality he was trying to place his people in the castle. Emily took to bed because she had worked hard on restoring the barrier in the bedroom. The Duke asked the king for permission to meet with his daughter, hoping to obtain from her permission for his servants to enter the palace. Rodrigo did not forbid meeting with the queen. Jade did not understand how the king allowed the duke to go to the queen, because the girl could submit to the duke's will due to his pressure. The commander had previously sought information about Kaylee Smith. He only learned that the girl was called a beautiful fool. Rodrigo came to visit his wife. When he entered her room, all the evil spirits surrounding him remained behind. The man felt lightness. The king inquired of his wife whether there was a need for the presence of people from the duchy near her. The illusion that the girl could make decisions was pleasant. Still, she decided to write another letter of refusal to her father. Due to such a response, Rodrigo became even more confused about his wife's intentions and pondered. Suddenly he noticed a wooden pole on the table, which he had previously taken from the girl. Emily only said that it was just her hobby and she was engaged in carving figures out of wood. Trying to save the situation from awkwardness, Delia brought the queen medicine. The guy watched Emily as she took her medication. He couldn't figure out this girl. Having immersed himself in thought, the king did not notice how he fell asleep sitting right in the chair. Jade was surprised at how Rodrigo managed to relax so close to the queen when even sleeping pills didn't help him. Emily shook the guy awake because it was wrong to sleep like that. Rodrigo could not understand how he managed to fall asleep so quickly. He asked the girl to move over and climbed into her bed. The queen was bewildered. They both needed a rest. Emily wrapped herself more snugly in the blanket. Unexpectedly, the king decided to apologize to her for the first night. Only the girl could not understand what exactly Rodrigo was talking about. It turned out that the king noticed Emily's tattered pajamas from which she was making amulets. He decided that it was his handiwork, but the girl explained that the guy had nothing to do with it. Rodrigo exhaled with relief and closed his eyes. Gradually, Emily also fell asleep, tightly wrapped in a blanket. In the morning, the girl woke up because she couldn't breathe. The queen's face was pressed against Rodrigo's chest, and the boy was embracing the girl in his sleep. Emily knew what to do. She was outraged that the king had touched her, even though he had promised not to do anything. She tried to count sheep to fall asleep again quickly. Suddenly, the guy pulled her closer to him and threw his leg over the girl. Emily tried to move away from Rodrigo. The guy only mumbled something in his sleep and turned over, leaning on top of the girl. The queen could no longer stand it, so she screamed and began pounding Rodrigo on the back. The guy opened his eyes, not immediately understanding what was happening. As soon as he realized what had happened, he immediately jumped away from Emily. The king blamed himself for scaring the girl. He immediately apologized to Emily, who turned away from him, wrapping herself more tightly in the blanket. She did not respond to him, childishly demonstrating her resentment. Rodrigo was already about to leave and started to get up. And then he noticed tears in the girl's eyes. He gently stroked Emily's head. The queen nervously fidgeted with her fingers. She was not afraid, only surprised. The king made her heart beat faster. She had never experienced anything like that before. When Rodrigo left, Emily grabbed her head. She could no longer fall asleep and calm her heart, which was pounding wildly as the girl remembered the guy. The king was in his study with Jade and a servant. He had not gone to the queen for more than 10 days. Rodrigo restrained himself from visiting the girl because he was afraid she would feel awkward. The young man was immersed in his thoughts when one of the servants brought him a casket. In it lay jewelry with precious stones. It was an offering from one district. The king remembered the terrible wooden bracelet that the girl wore. Jade hesitated. He pondered whether Rodrigo was digging at the queen or just grumbling. At that time, Emily was in one of the royal libraries. She wanted to learn more about the royal genealogy. The librarian handed the girl a book with copies of written documents that even not all members of the royal family knew about. Emily slammed the book down on the table in front of the little spirit and asked him to read what was written, as she could not do it herself. The baby began to protest and did not want to comply with the request. The girl needed to read this book because from Kaylee's diary, she learned absolutely nothing except frogs and cakes. Emily and Kaylee were completely different people. When the spirit was reproached for ingratitude, he nevertheless took the book in his little hands. The documents described kings and their achievements. At some point, Emily heard the surname Smith. One of the kings strengthened relations with this family for national unity. The queen recorded the key moments. The 27th king turned out to be Rodrigo Peter Blake. Only when he was born and the year of his accession to the throne were written about him. Emily was outraged by the fact that so little was written about the king. According to simple calculations, the girl found out that her husband was 4 years older than her, and Kaylee was 8 years older. A chuckle escaped Emily's mouth when she remembered moments where Rodrigo treated her like a child. She also realized that the kingdom's troubles and Rodrigo's troubles coincided that year, and she had moved into the queen's body. This coincidence seemed strange. A tiny creature tore the girl away from her thoughts. It reminded her of the king's long absence from her room, something she tried not to think about. The bright sun was shining outside, illuminating the entire kingdom. Emily and Delia strolled through the palace. Suddenly they heard muffled thumps. In one of the rooms, 2 men were fighting with wooden swords. This was Rodrigo and Jade. Emily had not seen the king for a long time and could not take her eyes off him. She noticed that her heart started beating faster when she watched her husband. Delia shared that the king and Jade have had a good relationship for a long time, and they used to often have sparring sessions. Emily saw that with each breath, Rodrigo's energy was clearing, meaning that communicating with friends was improving the guy's condition. After standing for a little while longer, the girl became disappointed, because it seemed to her that the guy didn't want to see her. When she turned to go to her room, Rodrigo suddenly jumped up to the girl and grabbed her by the hand. The guy was breathing heavily, and droplets of sweat were running down his face. He wanted to know why Emily was leaving. Emily moved slightly away from the guy. Rodrigo was irritated by her distance and the tone that had changed since their last meeting. The guy nervously buried his hands in his hair. And then he pulled a bracelet out of his pocket and handed it to Emily. Rodrigo justified his gift by saying that he didn't like the queen's wooden bracelet. This outraged the girl because her taste was condemned. Jade, who was watching them nearby, said that Rodrigo really wanted to give her that bracelet. The king was angry with his friend for revealing his feelings. Their bickering only amused Emily, and she burst into a ringing laugh. Rodrigo offered to escort the girl to her room, and they headed straight down the castle corridor. He said that he had not come to her because it seemed to him that the last time Emily had looked at him with contempt. The queen laughed with relief. Now she knew that he did not hate her. The girl thanked again for the gifted bracelet. Rodrigo took her hand and curiously examined the wooden bracelet on her wrist. At that moment, an evil spirit appeared behind the guy. The queen noticed it and drove it away. The king rubbed his neck, feeling relieved. The weight that had just appeared was gone immediately. He asked his wife how she had read the book on genealogy. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. After all, the girl couldn't have studied the language in which the documents in the book were written. Emily said that she was just looking through the contents, but noted to herself that Rodrigo knew about every single one of her steps, even the smallest. The girl raised her gaze at the king in surprise. He quickly changed the subject of the conversation and began talking about the forest located in the castle. Entry to it is accessible only to members of the royal family. Rodrigo extended his hand to Emily, offering to visit this place. The queen placed her hand in his, thereby agreeing to his proposal. A couple entered the forest. It was an amazing place. Emily opened her mouth in awe and looked around. She was seeing a place overflowing with sacred energy for the first time. The castle that has such a forest is the strongest shield that can protect the king from attacking spirits. And in this palace, something definitely went wrong at some point. It seemed that for the first time since the wedding day, the king had such a pure energy. He offered the queen to sit on the stumps. Rodrigo asked Emily not to go to that forest because he was afraid that there would be no one around if any danger occurred. The guy looked up. He, like the girl, enjoyed this place. The queen advised him to come here more often and train with Jade. Rodrigo looked at Emily uncomprehendingly. His words seemed to him like instructions before leaving this world. The girl reassured him and promised that she had no intention of dying. Having convinced the man of her desire to live, she asked him to return her knife. The condition of the wooden bracelet on her arm was deteriorating, and it was no longer sufficient for good protection against spirits. She needed to carve something like a post. Exhaling, Rodrigo promised to return the knife to the girl. However, Emily's words that she was not trying to die seemed strange to him. So the queen was not trying to die, but she was not going to live either. The girl froze in bewilderment. Those words hit the mark precisely. She really wanted to live, but fate couldn't be avoided. No matter how hard she tried to stay away from the water, she was now sitting in someone else's body. In the castle, a new day had arrived. The chirping of birds could be heard everywhere. Emily and the little spirit sat opposite the huge window and meditated. The girl was used to doing this to cleanse her energy. For today's reading, she prepared a book about the history of the kingdom. The owner of the Holy Sword, Arthur Lux Blake, saw how the Daemon Empire used evil forces. Therefore, the young man rose up and defeated the empire. Thus, the families of the Daemon Empire were divided. One of these families were the Smiths, who were great nobles. Later, the Smiths were included in the ranks of the true kingdom. At this time in the king's office, Duke Smith was asking the king to reinstate his eldest son to the position of commander. The space around Rodrigo was filled with evil spirits. He refused the promotion of the queen's brother and insulted Duke Smith. The duke tensed up, his face contorted with rage. Rodrigo stood up from his seat and looked down at the duke. The king advised Smith to take care of his life and threatened to deal with him if necessary. Turning sharply, Rodrigo headed for the door. Emily was carving a table in her room when she heard approaching footsteps. Rodrigo entered the room and began to complain about her father. The girl merely laughed. She was amused that the king came to complain to the duke. He continued to mutter that Kayleigh's father had asked to promote her brother. It seemed that the queen's family had already wearied him. Emily realized that she knew absolutely nothing about her brother's career and made a mental note to look for information about it in Kayleigh's diary. Rodrigo asked Emily if she found such words about her family unpleasant. Jade was outraged by the stupidity of his question, because no one would like to hear bad things about their loved ones. To everyone's surprise, the girl had no objection to such statements, because everyone knew perfectly well what was happening in the Keeley family. Jade's words made the queen ponder. He knew that Kayleigh Smith was considered a beautiful fool, but he didn't understand why the king had a different opinion of her. Over the past few days, he too had realized that she was not foolish at all. Jade even began to admire this mysterious girl. Rodrigo again noticed Emily's strange carved wooden statues and asked her what they were for. She was just finishing the second figure. The queen justified her hobby by saying that it helped her control her mind. The king mentioned that this activity was not appropriate for her age. Then the girl mentioned their age difference and that the guy looked very young for his age, which made him freeze for a moment. The girl laughed at his reaction, for which the guy began to pinch her cheeks playfully. Their childishness exuded simplicity and naivety. After Emily gave him one of her statues, but the guy was in no hurry to accept the gift. She advised putting the figurine under the bed as a talisman to protect him from nightmares and failures. Rodrigo agreed to take her gift, awkwardly stroking his neck with his hand. He was about to leave when Emily stopped the guy. The girl handed him the second statue as well. The guy looked puzzled at the figures, but still accepted the gift. He seemed embarrassed, then quickly left, slamming the doors. Finally, the night fell, and the castle was covered in semi-darkness. The king slept peacefully. The spirits could not get close to him because statues from Emily stood under his bed. In the morning, Rodrigo sat up in bed. Today he had slept well. The guy turned to the figurines that guarded him. He noticed that he felt more rested than usual. However, as soon as the king left the room, the evil spirits attacked him with renewed force. At that time, Emily was meditating as usual by the window. At her feet lay Kayleigh's diary. Usually Kayleigh described all sorts of nonsense in it, but this time everything was different. Shortly before her death, the girl wanted to propose to the guy she was in love with to leave their city. She knew he would never leave. Emily noticed that even after Kayleigh's soul died, her heart still responded to the name Lawrence. It was only unknown whether Kayleigh had told Lawrence about the escape before marrying Rodrigo. The queen caught herself wondering how this guy Lawrence was doing. A noise was heard in the corridor, which made the girl turn around. Rodrigo went crazy again. This made Emily think about her skills in making amulets against spirits. She remembered the shamans who had ruined their lives trying to do what was beyond their power. Perhaps the queen should also stop while there was still time. Unexpectedly, the images of Rodrigo and Lawrence blended in the girl's head. Emily grabbed her head in panic. Kayleigh didn't want to forget Lawrence in any way, and the queen didn't want to turn away from him. At that time, Rodrigo was raging in another part of the castle. His entire mind was seized by spirits. When Emily ran up, Jade did not want to let her near the king because it was dangerous. Having assured the commander that she would cope, the queen headed towards Rodrigo. The girl offered the king tea, as she had done the last time. In her trembling hands, she clutched the rosary, hoping it would help her. Emily approached Rodrigo, uttering words to scare away the spirits. The girl examined the guy's face. He felt better. His eyes were half closed and the king leaned powerlessly on Emily. He calmed the girl down and said that the gifted wooden pieces had helped him sleep well. As the guy was talking, his eyes slowly closed. And then Rodrigo fell. The guy fell asleep, leaning on the girl. Meanwhile, the queen was kneading his palms, thereby accelerating the energy flow. Rodrigo woke up briefly and asked Emily not to approach him again when he was in such a state. He was worried about the girl and afraid of harming her. The queen playfully stuck out her tongue. She was Smith and knew how to find a way to survive. The guy, noticing that the girl was massaging his hand again, asked what she was doing it for. Emily replied that it was just a massage to relieve tension. The king knew that she was holding something back. He disliked the distance the girl kept from him. The queen called out to Jade. Not knowing how to better choose her words, the girl inquired when Rodrigo had developed such a character. It turned out that his attacks began from the moment he ascended the throne, and almost 3 years had passed. The situation had only escalated recently. The queen asked Jade to train more often with her husband, but he doubted the correctness of this idea because Rodrigo became ferocious when a weapon fell into his hands. Emily pondered. It would be wrong to take away the king's weapon because he was a natural leader and it would offend him. The girl remembered the forest she used to visit with the king and asked Jade to take her friend there more often. The queen froze when the commander reminded her that entry into the forest was permitted only to members of the royal family. Her head was a jumble of memories. The moments that belonged to her mingled with those that belonged to Kaylee. Citing a headache, Emily went to her room. She slept through the rest of the day and woke up only the next morning. Yawning leisurely, the girl sat up in bed. She decided to spend this day without rushing anywhere. Despite her decision, she saw a guest at the door. Still, Emily was glad to see him. The king looked in on her, as it turned out, without any purpose. The girl managed to joke about her husband, thereby causing a disgruntled grimace on his face. The guy didn't hold a grudge against his wife. He liked her teasing. In fact, he came to invite Emily for the tea that didn't happen yesterday. Various treats were on the table. Emily was slowly drinking tea. This time the drink was very tasty. Rodrigo asked the girl to give him a hand massage, calling it cat kneading. The queen covered her face with her hands. She was offended that the healing practices of the shamans were called that. The guy tried to lie that he had slept poorly, but the girl didn't believe it because his face said the opposite. Emily frowned. The king's request troubled her. She was afraid that he suspected her of something. That's why the girl didn't want to do anything strange. Rodrigo, meanwhile, was lost in thought. He knew that Emily was hiding something from him. Placing his hands under his chin and smiling sweetly, the king repeated his request. The girl understood that she had no other choice but to do what the guy asked, and she decided to simply pretend. Emily took Rodrigo's hand and began gently pressing her fingers into his palm. The guy noticed that the girl's hands were very soft and lacked strength. He didn't notice himself starting to feel her palm. Such hands had definitely not been involved in woodcarving before. The king turned to Emily to ask the reason for her lie. But before he could open his mouth, the guy only widened his eyes. The girl did not notice anything strange and did not immediately understand what was going on. Rodrigo pointed to the bust of his wife, whose laces had come undone. He turned away so as not to embarrass the girl, while Emily frantically tried to tie her dress back on. The king reached out to the girl to help her with the laces. Emily seemed to blush from head to toe. Rodrigo, however, was not at all embarrassed. When the dress returned to a decent state, the girl was ready to sink through the floor. She accused the guy of reacting inappropriately to her appearance. She wanted him not to show it. With her remarks, Emily completely confused Rodrigo. He tried to calm the girl who hid her face behind her hair and didn't want to look at the guy. At that moment, Emily promised herself not to do anything conspicuous anymore. The next day dawned in the kingdom. Jade entered the king's office. Rodrigo was sitting at the desk doing paperwork. The commander brought the report on the matter that the king had entrusted to him earlier. The first 2 brides were poisoned. Only after that it became known that Duke Smith wanted to become related to the royal family. But in order to accuse the duke, evidence was needed, which was not available at the moment. Jade also learned from Delia about the diary that the queen had brought from the duchy. Only the girl did not write anything in it, but only occasionally reread it. The commander suggested seizing the diary and studying its contents. However, he remained dissatisfied with the king's decision. Rodrigo did not want to be an overbearing husband and did not intend to deprive his wife of personal space. Suddenly the king rose from his chair and offered Jade to stretch a little. At that time near the lake, Emily was approached by the same great spirit she had met on her wedding day. He began talking to the girl again. The queen asked not to engage in conversation with her, while she covered her face with her hands, trying simply not to look at the guy. She didn't want any problems because of her connections with spirits. The guy said that the girl was creating problems for herself and hit the nail on the head. The spirit continued the story about itself, which greatly angered the queen. Emily broke the stick in half that she was holding in her hands during their conversation. At that time, Rodrigo and Jade were training with swords. Suddenly, the king felt something strange and ended the training. The guy headed straight out onto the street. It seemed to him that his wife should be somewhere there. So he walked until he found himself by the lake. Rodrigo remembered the moment when the girl was pulled out of the water during a suicide attempt, and he hurried to the water. At that time, Emily was trying to find out from the spirit the reason why the evil spirits were so strongly attached to the king. She wanted to know this. The girl raised her face and looked pitifully at the guy. The spirit sat down next to Emily. It seemed he was ready to tell her the truth. The spirit smiled mysteriously. It turned out to be just a joke, and the girl had to solve the riddle herself. Emily crossed her arms over her chest. She had no idea what to do. Her new life was falling apart, just like the previous one. The queen even examined Haley's lines of fate, but it all turned out not very well. The spirit called the girl's real name, even though she had introduced herself. This put Emily on guard, because she could not fathom all the capabilities of this being. The guy was curious why the queen was constantly afraid if she had already survived the most terrible thing, death. The girl clenched her dress in her fist in anger. In the distance, Rodrigo appeared, heading straight towards them. The king's face looked troubled, and a whole army of dark energy swirled behind him. The spirit leapt onto the horse and rushed off to deal with the evil creatures. Emily just watched how easily he handled them. When Rodrigo approached her, she assured the guy that she had no intention of jumping into the water, but had simply come to breathe some fresh air. The king plopped down on the ground next to his wife. Emily wagged her finger at Rodrigo and advised him to spend time taking a walk. The guy noticed that her character was different from what he had previously heard about Kaylee. He liked her teasing. The queen turned away thoughtfully. She did not know whether she should behave in keeping with Kaylee's character. She liked joking with the person who was looking questioningly at the girl's face at that moment. The guy asked her to say something to him instead of being silent. Then Emily began giving him advice for maintaining spiritual health, which amused the king because it was more like the grumbling of a real wife. Rodrigo reached out his hand to the girl and called her into the forest. The queen liked this guy, but she was afraid to trust him. They came to the forest, which as always was full of sacred energy. Rodrigo found it helpful to be here because his energy was strengthened in this place, and Emily was unable to cleanse the energy on her own. They sat down on the grass. Unexpectedly for the girl, the guy put his hand on Emily's leg, and then his head lay on her lap. The king quickly fell asleep in that position. The spouses were playfully bickering a bit. Rodrigo enjoyed their squabbles. He felt comfortable. As soon as Emily heard the news about the hunting competitions from her husband, she was ready to explode with anger. He was not allowed to kill. The girl did not notice how in a fit of anger she struck the king with her elbow and immediately began to apologize. Competitions would not be cancelled by Kaylee's father. Emily frowned with indignation because the relative was interfering with her again. The king shared that last year the competitions were cancelled, as they were something like secular gatherings where many outsiders gathered. Emily realized that Rodrigo did not want strangers to see him in a deranged state. She gently stroked the king's head lying on her lap. The guy never confessed his madness to anyone. He felt that if he said it out loud, he would truly become a mad king. He patted the girl on the cheek. It seemed to him that if he told her about it, his soul would be at peace. Although the king knew that the girl was from the family of a political enemy and could tell her father everything, some subconscious trust prompted him to open up to Emily. The queen did not allow the boy to say anything and covered his mouth with her hands. She knew it was not the truth. Rodrigo still felt relieved, despite not having time to say anything. Emily promised to support him during the competitions. Several days later, a meeting was taking place in the castle building. Duke Smith tried to find out from the king about the hunting competitions. Rodrigo asked for some documents to be brought to him. He needed to vent a little anger. The king placed an anonymous complaint about the discrepancy between Smith's actual income and paid taxes in front of the duke on the table. Rodrigo leaned over his ear and threatened the duke not to tarnish the queen's reputation. The king tapped on the back of the chair and headed for the exit. After all, the guy gave Smith a chance to fix everything. Rodrigo also announced hunting competitions next month and mentioned his excellent health thanks to a good wife. The duke pursed his lips and bent his head over the table. He was furious. Now the king had changed, and the duke could not get close to him in any way. And before, Smith thought that his daughter would help him with this after marriage. That same day, it had already grown dark outside and deep night had fallen. Emily was working on a new set of prayer beads. The sounds of wood carving could be heard throughout the room. Rodrigo, however, was sleeping on her bed and had just opened his eyes. He was surprised that the girl was still working on the new bracelet. Emily was scratching hieroglyphs on each bead while muttering an incantation to ward off dark spirits. She was so immersed in work and focused that she did not hear her husband. The king had heard of Kaylee's interest in fashion, but he saw nothing beautiful in this strange bracelet. Emily laughed and explained that she made beads for spiritual enhancement. The work for today was finished. Rodrigo invited the girl to lie down with him on the bed, but Emily was in no hurry to do so and sat down on the couch. Since the day of visiting the forest, Rodrigo constantly rested on her bed. Her room had a clean energy thanks to the amulets, and the guy slept excellently here. It was already late at night today. The king rose from the bed and approached the girl. Then he took her in his arms and carried her to the bed. The guy himself was going to lie on the couch, as he saw that Emily was shy about sleeping together. The queen felt awkward that she was making him sleep on the couch, so she invited him to her bed. It seemed that the king had been waiting for nothing else. Before she could get more comfortable, he had already jumped under the blanket. The guy started a conversation that they were husband and wife and couldn't just keep sleeping all the time. These words greatly embarrassed the girl. Stroking Emily's head, Rodrigo reassured her that everything was fine and she could always refuse. The king understood that his wife needed to prepare herself mentally for this, because for the sake of the guy she loved, she had even jumped into the water. And Kaylee's beloved must be at the competitions. Lawrence will be there. The king sat in his study. In his hands was a stack of papers. He recalled the name of Lawrence Irvine, Kaylee's lover. He was a knight of distinguished name. Rodrigo decided to read the report of Kaylee's investigation, which had been compiled by one of his servants. After reading, the king beckoned Jade and the servant who had been tasked with creating the report to come to him. Rodrigo was outraged by the quality of the work done, because nothing in the report corresponded to reality. It was as if it described a completely different girl. The king gave the task to carry out this assignment again until the end of the hunting competitions. The guy did not understand why this situation irritated him so much, perhaps because he knew his wife was hiding something from him. Jade was tasked with keeping an eye on the girl because she had been spotted near the lake again. A few days later, Emily was sitting by the lake again. She was frightened by the spirit that appeared out of nowhere. The girl even fell to her knees in fear. She asked for help during the competition, but the spirit wanted something in exchange. Emily was ready to do anything that did not threaten her life. The guy asked for the girl herself as a reward. Since Emily did not love the king, the spirit decided that he had a chance for a relationship with the queen. He was aware of what the girl had imagined during their previous meetings. Emily flared up and was outraged by such words. The queen wanted to clarify the seriousness of the spirit's intentions to help, which only caused the boy to chuckle. The spirit ruffled the girl's hair and advised her to enjoy life and not worry about the afterlife. He also reproached Emily for trying to make a deal with the spirit, which would have ruined her life. The guy was right, but the girl couldn't handle it on her own. The handmade scarves didn't protect against the dark energy. Emily turned away from the ghost. She was offended that she was seriously interested in help, and he was joking with her. The spirit bid farewell to the girl and vanished. The queen remained alone in the glade. The girl tried, but felt dizzy due to lack of energy. Emily's eyes gradually closed. The next moment, the girl was already lying on the ground unconscious. Sometime later in the queen's room, the king was very worried about the girl and feared that it was a protest against him, so he asked how many times she had been in such a state since living in the palace. This amused Emily, because Rodrigo did not notice that whenever the guy had a breakdown, the queen fell ill. All this was due to energy depletion. The girl's laughter frightened the king even more, and he began to examine his wife. Emily thought that her illnesses were causing trouble for the guy, so she apologized. Rodrigo asked her not to speak to the girl like that anymore because he knew that their marriage was hateful to her. Emily assured him that she did not think so, to which the guy asked her to name his name as proof. The king was unaccustomed to hearing his name from his wife because she had never called him that. He suggested calling him by his first name. At that moment, something inside the girl flinched, but she refused her husband's new nickname. Emily hid from Rodrigo under the blanket. She needed to keep a distance between them because the closer they got, the more the girl wanted to help the guy. The king yanked the blanket off Emily. The girl burst into a ringing laugh. The guy's cheeks flushed. Rodrigo was starting to develop feelings for the girl. The queen inquired again about the seriousness of intentions to hold the competitions. The guy was on the alert because he didn't expect her to still be upset about it. He thought the girl was a big animal lover and felt compassion for creatures. Emily let out a sigh of regret. The spirit refused to help her, and the embroidered shawls had almost no effect. The king's eyes widened in surprise when the girl offered to break his arm so he wouldn't participate in the hunt. She even suggested that Jade do it. However, that was of course a silly idea. Emily said that she would give the king a handkerchief for the competitions, and was very outraged when Rodrigo doubted the truthfulness of her words. The guy thoughtfully held his head. He knew that Kaylee had Lawrence. When Emily pointed out that the scarves were of no particular use, Rodrigo took it as a refusal to give him a scarf. He turned the girl's head in different directions. The guy lay down on the bed next to the girl. He admitted that their conversation had upset him a little. Rodrigo also mentioned that he considers Emily too secretive. He caused a storm of indignation from the queen with this. She jumped out of bed. Emily pointed to the scarves that lay in a pile on the table. The number of items surprised the guy, and he decided that the girl wanted to distribute them to other participants as well. The king also noticed scratches on the queen's fingers. She had worked hard, undermining her health because of this. The guy exhaled. He didn't like that his wife was so upset about the shawls, but it was nice that she kept the promise she had made to him. The king laid the girl on the bed and asked her to rest well. Emily was touched that Rodrigo had thought about her wanting to hand out handkerchiefs. The guy put his hand under the girl's head as a pillow. The king called her to lie closer because his wrist was pinched. Emily was a little taken aback by such a request. Rodrigo pulled the girl towards him. The girl felt awkward lying so close to him. The young man was wary that the queen could withdraw at any moment. He looked intently at the girl's face. The king gently stroked his wife's hair. Rodrigo asked Emily why she kept looking so sadly at the water. The guy stared intently at the girl's face, and then he only embraced his wife and pressed her tightly to himself. He realized that this was exactly what he had always wanted, these touches, embraces, and love. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she clutched the blanket in her hand. The problem was with the king. Rodrigo hugged the girl again and allowed her not to answer his questions if she didn't want to. The queen wished her husband a good night and fell asleep. The day of the hunting competitions finally arrived. Tents and carts were everywhere. Emily observed everything happening from a secluded corner. Rodrigo was dressed in beautiful armor. He was talking and seemed to be very busy. The queen was dressed in a luxurious dress. In fact, she wanted her husband to take the last place. Emily went out to the people to give the king handkerchiefs. Rodrigo turned at the noise. A young blonde man dismounted from the horse. It was Lawrence Irwin. The knight uttered the name of the one he still loved. Emily was walking with Delia in search of the king at that time, and then she rushed to run. Finally, the queen found her husband in the crowd. He sat on his horse. The king immediately noticed his wife. Emily brought Rodrigo napkins. These were amulets against evil spirits. The inscriptions on them are spells for good luck and against bad karma. The king inquired what he needed the 3 handkerchiefs for. The girl smiled and said that the rest would be spares. In fact, she was trying to make up for the quality of the amulets with their quantity. The king accepted the handkerchiefs and thanked his wife for the gift. Emily was pleased that she had embarrassed the guy and how carefully he treated her handiwork. While the spouses were talking, Lawrence was making his way through the crowd towards them. The king wanted to bring something for Emily from the hunt, but the girl refused. She wanted to advise her husband to be gentler, but she couldn't do that because he was sitting on the throne. Therefore, Emily only wished for her husband to return home safe and sound. Rodrigo did not quite understand her words, so he remained pensive. His thoughts were interrupted by what was happening behind him. At the head of the crowd stood Lawrence, calling for the queen. Tears streamed from Emily's eyes, which she was unable to control. Memories of her love with Lawrence flooded over the girl about Kaylee. The king noticed this and inquired if everything was all right with the girl. To hide her face, Emily buried it in her husband's chest. She apologized for causing inconvenience to the king. Rodrigo calmed the girl down. A smile spread across the queen's face. She was glad at that moment to have such a wonderful husband. The king lifted Emily's face to make sure she was all right. The guy said that the situations still need to be corrected so that people don't have any questions. Then he took the girl's face in his hands, and the next moment Rodrigo kissed Emily. When the spouses broke away from each other, the guy said that there was no need for the kiss. He did it because he wanted to kiss the girl. Emily was unable to respond. She only looked into Rodrigo's eyes. Lawrence had been watching everything that was happening all this time. After what he saw, he turned around and walked away. The king was already heading down the road, while Emily looked after him. She was pleased that the king had defended her. She felt guilty and wanted to repay him, so she ran after him. These were her true feelings. Emily took the guy's hand in hers, and then she put the rosary in the guy's palm. The girl still asked to return the bracelet to her when the man comes back. The king bid farewell to his wife again and set off on horseback for the hunt. It was already dark outside and the hunters lit a campfire. Rodrigo suggested shooting Lawrence, scaring Jade with this. The commander was afraid that the king was having another attack, but it was just a joke. It was known that Lawrence himself had dumped the girl. The king was troubled by why she herself had not dumped the guy. At one moment, his former self, Keely, became repulsive to him. He recalled the situation that occurred when the queen saw Lawrence. Her face was bewildered. The king wanted to get to know his wife better, but she was constantly hiding something from him. Jade advised to ask the girl about everything directly. A piece of meat wouldn't go into the king's mouth. He knew that if he acted in this way, he would lose the queen, especially since she already knew about his distrust of her. Rodrigo asked Jade to hunt alone in these competitions, but to catch more game than Kaylee's brother, in order to use this as a reason to deny him a promotion. And of course, he had to catch more than Lawrence. The king's face took on a gloomy expression when he remembered that night. Rodrigo looked up at the starry sky. He wondered what Emily was doing at that moment. The sun rose over the castle grounds. It was early morning. The queen walked around the room with a candle in her hands. She tried to help her husband with the hunt in any way she could, so she recited spells all morning. The girl had made a to-do list for the whole day, so as not to get bored in Rodrigo's absence.